Hello chess friends! In this video I'm going to be covering one of my favorite games by Magnus Carlsen where he defeats a fellow super GM, Jan-Krzysztof Duda, in only 18 moves. That's when the resignation occurred. However, the game was effectively over by move 13 when Duda makes a fatal blunder, which Carlsen then punishes with engine-like precision. But I think the most remarkable thing about this game is not the way that Carlsen punishes the blunder, but the way he sets the stage for the blunder to be made by making what looked to me to be alien chess moves, moves that I would never think of, since they seem to fly in the face of a lot of the traditional chess principles that we think should govern the opening. So without any further ado, let's take a look at this game and see how it all went down. Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces plays d4. We have knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to c3, all the standard stuff so far, d5, and then we have this exchange variation from Carlsen taking on d5. Now knight takes d5 by Duda. An instructive moment, you can take with the knight here because if Carlsen were to play e4, you have the option of knight takes c3, and you don't have to back up with your knight and lose a tempo. So this is only playable because white has the knight on c3. But that's not what was played in the game. Instead, Carlsen opts for knight to f3. Black strikes at white's central pawn with c5. At this point, e4 would be a decent move, but Carlsen opts for e3 instead, just supporting his central pawn. Duda takes on d4, and Carlsen recaptures with the pawn, which is now an isolated pawn. But Duda here immediately plays knight takes c3, and after b takes c3, you might be wondering, why allow Carlsen to repair his pawn structure so soon? No more isolated pawn. Well, the point is, after Duda's next move, queen to c7, this pawn is under attack by the queen, and white is going to have to make some less than ideal move to defend that pawn. Obviously, defending with the bishop here or here is not the most active way to develop your dark squared bishop. You'd like to move it to a more aggressive post out this direction later on. You could defend with queen to c2, but that is not the best square for the queen. White's ideal development here would be bishop d3, queen to e2, supporting e5 where a knight could hop to, and then perhaps the queen and the bishop could even at some point form the battery towards the king side with the queen in front. Just better long-term prospects with the queen on e2 in this position. But Carlsen, he goes for another option. You don't have to defend this pawn. He ignores the attack and just plays rook to b1. Duda now has the opportunity to win a pawn, but he declines. He plays knight to d7. If you play queen takes c3 check here, after bishop d2, queen has to move, and then bishop d3, look who's getting a pretty big lead in development. 4 pieces developed compared to black's 1 piece. More than enough compensation for the lost pawn. So Duda says no thank you, I'll just develop. Now Carlsen offers a real gambit. He plays bishop to d3. And at this point, Duda just can't resist. He goes ahead and takes the pawn on c3 with check. Now, what's the difference after this move bishop d3 is played? The difference is, now there is no bishop to d2, or else you're losing the bishop, since the queen's access to the d3 square is blocked. So what other option does Carlsen have here? Well, you could block with the queen, but offering a queen trade when you're a pawn down, not ideal. Carlsen wants to keep the queens on the board. And he does so by making a move that I probably would not consider. King to f1. I would never want this position. Being a pawn down, I can never castle. Seems pretty bad to me, but the engine actually doesn't think it's too bad for white. It does favor black a bit, but it thinks this is a totally playable position for white. And after Duda's next move, bishop to e7, he becomes even more playable for white. That move was not accurate for a reason that is probably not obvious to you if you have not seen this game before. Take a minute in this position and see if you can figure out what white's best strategy is. What is the best way for white to complete his development here? Carlsen finds the best move, h4. The idea is rook here and then rook g3, pointed right at black's king side. If the bishop had moved to d6 instead, there would be no rook g3. That's why bishop d6 was the move that black should have played. But I wouldn't dream of this sort of maneuver here. Do you know what I would play in this position instead of h4? I would play a move that the computer engine hates. I would play g3 here and then develop my king to g2. So after something like this, king g2, I would think this is the best way to go. But the engine thinks differently. It thinks that black is much better here, maybe even winning because of this diagonal. along which white is going to be vulnerable to attack. So black here can play knight f6 first to prevent bishop e4, so that b6 followed by bishop b7 bearing down on that diagonal can be played. But it's Carlsen, and he finds h4. Did he find this over the board, or was this some computer prep? I mean, we're only on move 12 here. I don't know, but it leads to a pretty devastating attack. Duda castles. Now we got rook h3. Another bonus to this move rook h3 is that there are some threats against the black queen. So that queen really needs to get out of there. Duda waits just one move too long. The correct move here would have been queen to c7. But Duda thinks that he can get away with waiting and plays knight to f6. This is the fatal blunder. If he would have played queen c7, white would be a bit better. But this is just game over after Carlsen's move knight to e5. Okay, now it's obvious that the queen needs to move because there's the threat of bishop takes h7 check, followed by rook taking the queen. So the queen really does need to move. Duda goes to a5, and now rook to g3. The threat here is bishop to h6. So let me just show you how that would go down. Bishop to h6 with a threat to this pawn here. Obviously, if you move the pawn, you're going to lose the rook. Looks like you can defend with knight to e8 maybe. Nope, because there's a bishop sacrifice. Bishop takes, knight takes, and now queen g4. How are you saving the knight? I'm playing bishop f6. Yeah, but now look at this. Queen's hitting h7. How are you defending that? And it's a checkmate threat. So your king is going to need to have an escape square. You try to move this rook to let the king go this way. Well, now f7. There's a problem on that square. So the best play would be h6. That way, after queen takes h6, at least the f pawn is not hit by the queen from h5 anymore, and you can move the rook. But unfortunately, on h6, the queen can just pick up the bishop like that. And now, what are you doing about this knight? This is a checkmate in 2. Black can only stall it. So, Duda attempts to answer this threat with king to h8. Obviously, now if you try bishop h6, the bishop can just be taken since this pawn is no longer pinned by the rook. But now Carlsen has bishop to g5. Now let me show you what the threat is here. If black doesn't address the threats on the king side, let's say he tries something like b5. Makes a queenside move. We got bishop takes f6, bishop takes, and now queen to h5. Again, we're hitting h7, we're hitting f7. Maybe g6 can block everything. Nope, because you got bishop takes g6. Threatening checkmate. You take the bishop. Well, knight takes g6 check. Can't take the knight because your pawn's pinned. Once you move the king, the knight's taking the rook, and you can see everything's falling apart. Black's getting checkmated pretty quickly here. Let's look at another idea, h6. Unfortunately, that doesn't address the threat to f7, so there's just knight takes, king moves, and then again, you have a pinned pawn, so knight takes h6 works. So Duda attempts to address all of this by playing h6. This, unfortunately for Duda, is not a defense, though, because there is bishop takes h6. And after the pawn takes, Carlsen plays the quiet queen to f3. And here, on move 18, Duda has to resign, because there is simply no way to prevent queen to f4, queen takes h6, which will result in mate. It's remarkable that h6 cannot be defended. King can't defend it. All those squares are covered. If you move the knight, you're going to have a problem on f7. For example, knight to d5, knight takes f7 check. You got to take with the rook, queen takes, uh-oh, you got problems. So moving that knight is just going to completely fail. Same problem with knight g8, knight takes, same thing. One other try would be to play queen to d2. Okay, no queen f4 now, but after rook d1, queen cannot stay on this diagonal. So once this queen moves to safety, guess what? Queen f4, queen takes h6. Game over for Duda. So just a very clean and beautiful attack from Carlsen. Duda did make a blunder. So objectively, it might not be Carlsen's most amazing game. It's not an immortal game or anything. But he did come up with some moves that I think a lot of players would not think of. Just this whole idea of h4, rook h3, which he must have had in mind at the moment where he decided to move his king in response to the check, right? And he must have even had it in mind when he played bishop d3. Because after queen takes c3 check here, king f1 is really the only good response. And after king f1, this is really the only good way to complete your development. So some very impressive opening insight. Looks a lot like a computer line. Did it come from Magnus Carlsen's computer-like brain, or did he actually prep it with an engine? Tell me what you think in the comments. And thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel for more analysis as good as this and even better coming your way soon.